The sun had just begun to rise over the vast plains, its golden light gently warming the earth. Dusty, a young Mustang foal, ventured further away from his herd than he ever had before. His legs wobbled beneath him, and his coat was still damp with the morning dew. He had been chasing butterflies, lost in the joy of youth, but now the joy faded into realization. He had strayed too far. The familiar shapes of his family were nowhere in sight. His heart pounded faster with panic. The open plain stretched out in every direction, but no sign of his herd appeared. Dusty froze, trying to calm himself, but the sounds of the wild, distant rustlings and the cry of an eagle overhead only heightened his sense of isolation. He had always relied on the strength of his herd, their guidance and protection, but now he was alone. The prairie that once felt so vast and free now felt cold and unfriendly. Dusty could feel the weight of fear pressing down on him. He wasn't ready for this. The world outside the safety of his family was a dangerous place, and the first lesson of the wild had become painfully clear. No one survives alone. His instincts screamed for him to find the herd, but there was something else lurking in the tall grasses, something Dusty could not yet see or understand. Not far from Dusty, a wolf pack silently moved through the tall grasses. At the lead was Kiva, a sleek she-wolf with piercing yellow eyes. Her body was lean, and every muscle was finely tuned for the hunt. She had grown accustomed to the harsh realities of survival, and today, the pack was hungry. The days without a successful hunt had left them weak. Kiva's sharp eyes scanned the landscape, and then, in the distance, she spotted it, a lone foal separated from its herd. Dusty, unaware of the danger, wandered aimlessly, his small frame easy to spot against the backdrop of the plain. Kiva's eyes narrowed. A young foal was the perfect target, weak, inexperienced, and far from the protection of its family. She signaled to her pack, and with practiced ease, they began to fan out, surrounding Dusty. They moved like shadows, swift and silent, weaving through the grasses with calculated precision. Kiva was a hunter, but today, the pack would share in the chase. As the circle of wolves grew tighter, the foal remained oblivious to the growing threat. His focus was still on finding his herd, unaware that danger was stalking him with every step. Kiva, always patient and calm, knew that it was only a matter of time before the young Mustang would realize the truth of his situation. And by then, it would be too late. The air seemed to grow thicker as Dusty continued to wander through the grasses, his steps unsteady but desperate. The howls of distant wolves echoed faintly, a reminder of the danger that lurked beyond the horizon. Dusty's ears twitched, and he glanced around nervously, his instincts kicking in. He could feel the presence of someone, or rather, something dangerous. But there was no time to think. The fear gnawed at him, urging him to run, but his legs felt weak from the long hours of wandering. His heart raced, and every fiber of his being screamed for him to escape, but he didn't know which way to turn. It was as if the whole world had shifted, leaving him alone in a sea of uncertainty. Little did Dusty know, the wolves had already closed in, their movements as fluid as water. They surrounded him, their eyes glowing from the shadows, waiting for him to make the first move. Dusty's breathing quickened, and in a panic, he darted to the left, trying to break free. But the wolves were faster than he could have imagined. Kiva, watching from the rear, signaled her pack, and they began to close the distance. Dusty's options were narrowing quickly, and fear clawed at him with every step. The landscape had become a trap, and Dusty was the prey. Dusty's hooves pounded the earth beneath him as he tried to escape, his legs trembling with each frantic step. He could feel the wolves' eyes on him, their presence pressing down like a heavy weight. His breath came in short bursts, his body beginning to tire. He had never run this far before, and his legs were growing weak. Behind him, the wolves moved in perfect harmony, closing in from all sides. Dusty's heart raced with terror, but his legs weren't fast enough. The tall grasses that had once seemed like a shelter now felt like a trap. Every direction he turned seemed to lead him back to the same conclusion, a never-ending chase. The wolves were too close now. He could hear their breathing, sharp and heavy, as they closed the gap. The first wolf lunged, snapping its jaws just inches from Dusty's hind legs. The foal screamed in pain as the wolf's claws raked his skin. He stumbled forward, but the pain in his legs slowed him. Another wolf came in from the side, its eyes gleaming with hunger. Dusty's thoughts raced. He had to escape. He had to find a way to survive. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The wolves were closing in, and he was running out of time. The world seemed to slow down, as if everything was waiting for the inevitable. Kiva moved with deadly precision, her gaze fixed on Dusty as he tried to flee. She was close now, her muscles coiling, ready to strike. The pack followed her lead, weaving through the grasses with practiced ease. Dusty was too slow, his fear weighing him down. As Kiva lunged forward, her jaws snapping at his hind legs, Dusty tried to jump out of the way, but his exhaustion had caught up with him, and he stumbled, falling hard onto the ground. The pain in his legs made it impossible to rise quickly, and Kiva seized the opportunity. Her teeth sunk into Dusty's leg, a sharp, searing pain that made the foal cry out. He struggled, kicking his legs in an attempt to break free, but the wolf held firm, dragging him toward the pack. The sight of his body being pulled away from the safety of the open plains was the last thing Dusty saw before everything blurred into a haze of pain and terror. But just as the pack began to close in for the final strike, a sudden, thunderous noise interrupted the moment. A voice, loud and commanding, rang through the air, carrying the weight of authority. "Get away from that foal." The word seemed to freeze the wolves in their tracks. Dusty, half conscious and unable to fully understand what was happening, felt a glimmer of hope flicker deep inside him. Perhaps there was a chance to survive after all. The wolves paused, their ears flicking back in confusion. They had never encountered a threat like this before. The voice that had interrupted them was low, but carried a command that made even Kiva hesitate. It wasn't the sound of a predator. It was the sound of something else, something unfamiliar. Dusty, still on the ground, tried to lift his head, his vision blurry. Through the haze, he saw a figure emerge from the shadows of the trees. A human, tall and imposing, stood in front of him, holding a long spear. The man's eyes glinted with determination, and he stood firm, his presence a stark contrast to the wild, untamed landscape around him. The wolves, ever cautious, didn't know how to react. The human had come out of nowhere, and they weren't sure whether to retreat or confront him. Kiva growled low in her throat, her instincts telling her to attack. But something in the human's posture made her hesitate. This was no ordinary prey. This was something else entirely. As the pack remained still, the man took a step forward, his gaze never leaving the wolves. "Leave the foal alone," he commanded, his voice steady and calm. His grip tightened on the spear, and the wolves, unsure of the danger this human posed, took a step back. Dusty, now fully conscious, could hardly believe what was happening. Had he been saved? Or was this another danger? The tension in the air was thick as the wolves and the human faced off. Dusty, his heart still pounding, remained frozen on the ground, watching the standoff unfold. Kiva, her eyes narrowing, was the first to break the silence. She let out a low growl, signaling to her pack to prepare for battle. The pack shifted, their bodies coiling with the promise of attack. But the human remained unmoved, his spear still pointed in their direction. He knew the danger wasn't over. The wolves were cunning hunters, and they would test his resolve. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Dusty could feel the energy in the air, an unspoken challenge between the predator and the protector. He had been completely unaware of this strange power that humans held in the wild. They were not just creatures of the land, like the wolves. They were something different, something that commanded respect. The wolves circled, their movements deliberate, but the human was unflinching. He spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "I said leave. Now." Kiva paused, her sharp eyes locked on him. She wasn't accustomed to being ordered around. but she recognized the strength in the human stance. For a moment, it seemed like time stood still, the fate of Dusty hanging in the balance. Would the wolves retreat, or would the battle escalate? Only one thing was certain. The wild had just become a much more dangerous place. The standoff stretched on, the tension palpable in the air. Dusty remained still, watching as the wolves circled cautiously, their eyes never leaving the human. Kiva, the pack leader, growled low, unwilling to back down. She was a seasoned hunter, used to commanding respect in the wild. But the human's unwavering presence gave her pause. The pack was hungry, but Kiva knew better than to challenge an unknown threat without understanding the full extent of its power. She hesitated, her eyes flickering back and forth between the human and her pack. The hunger in her belly gnawed at her, but something else, a deep, instinctive fear, held her in check. She wasn't sure what this human was capable of, but she didn't want to find out. With a low snarl, Kiva gave a sharp signal to her pack. One by one, the wolves began to retreat, slinking back into the shadows from which they had emerged. They hadn't won this battle, but the hunt wasn't over. Dusty, still trembling, watched as the wolves vanished, their growls echoing in the distance. The human, breathing heavily, lowered his spear, his stance relaxing. He turned toward Dusty, a soft smile crossing his face. "It's all right now," he said, his voice calm but filled with the weight of the moment. Dusty, still in disbelief, felt a sense of relief flood through him. He was safe, for now. The human, standing tall and steady, glanced down at Dusty, who was still trembling from the close encounter. "You're safe now," he said, his voice a deep comfort. The foe, still in shock, looked up at the man with wide eyes, unsure of what to make of him. This was no ordinary man. He wasn't like the humans Dusty had heard about, the ones who hunted, who scared the animals away. No! This human had saved him. He hadn't attacked, and he hadn't seemed afraid of the wolves. There was something different about him. Dusty took a cautious step toward the man, his legs still unsteady. The human knelt down, meeting Dusty's gaze with gentle eyes. "Don't worry," he said, offering a soft smile. "I'm not going to hurt you." Dusty, still uncertain, inched closer. He had never been this close to a human before, and there was something both strange and comforting about the man's presence. Dusty could feel the warmth radiating from the man, a strange sense of safety that he hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't just a man. This was someone who understood the land, who knew how to survive in it. Dusty didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He wasn't alone anymore. The human extended his hand cautiously toward Dusty, who took a hesitant step back. The foe was still unsure about the strange figure before him. The last few moments had been a whirlwind of terror and confusion, and now, with the threat gone, Dusty didn't know what to do. The human noticed the foe's uncertainty, and with a gentle smile, he lowered his hand. "It's okay, little one," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." Dusty stared at the human, trying to make sense of the situation. How had this man appeared out of nowhere, just when he was about to fall victim to the wolves? He seemed different from the humans Dusty had heard about, the ones who hunted animals for sport. This one wasn't like them. He had saved him. The man sat down on the ground, his legs folded beneath him. "You've had a rough time, haven't you?" He spoke as though talking to an old friend, his voice calm and reassuring. "I know what it's like to be alone in the wild. It's a tough place, but there's always a way through it." Dusty took a step closer, curiosity beginning to replace some of his fear. The human had a kindness in his eyes that made the foe feel strangely safe. Maybe he wasn't so different after all. The human stood up slowly, watching Dusty with a thoughtful gaze. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his voice filled with gentle amusement. Dusty shook his head, still unsure of how to respond. The foe had never met a human like this before, one who seemed more attuned to the land than anything else. The man began walking, motioning for Dusty to follow. "Come on, little one. Let's get you out of here. I know a safe place nearby. away from the wolves and the dangers of the plains. Dusty, still hesitant, followed the human's lead, his hooves light against the dirt. As they moved through the open land, the foal couldn't help but feel a mix of wonder and confusion. He had been alone, lost, and now, here was a stranger who had saved his life and was leading him to safety. The human spoke occasionally, telling Dusty stories of his own journeys, how he had learned the ways of the wild, how he had survived the dangers of the plains. Dusty listened, his young mind trying to make sense of everything. He was learning more in this one encounter than he had ever known before. The wild was a dangerous place, but with the right guidance, maybe there was hope for survival. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains, the human and Dusty reached a small, sheltered valley surrounded by tall cliffs. The valley was quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the vast openness of the plains. A small creek babbled through the middle, its clear water sparkling in the fading light. Dusty's heart felt lighter as he took in the sights. The area was untouched, a hidden gem in the wilderness. The human, smiling softly, gestured to the valley. "This is my home," he said. "I come here when I need to find peace or rest. And now, it's your safe place, too." Dusty looked around, the quiet tranquility of the valley washing over him. The wild felt less threatening here, more like a place of refuge. The human led the foal to a shaded spot near the creek. "Rest here for now," he said, his voice soft. "Tomorrow, we'll start preparing for your journey back to your herd." Dusty, exhausted from the day's events, collapsed onto the soft grass. He was safe for now. He could rest. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he wasn't completely alone in the world after all. The night was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves and the gentle flow of the creek. Dusty lay on the soft grass, staring up at the stars above. The man had made a fire, its warm glow flickering in the evening air. He had told Dusty more stories of his life in the wild, about the lessons he had learned and the survival skills he had mastered. Dusty listened intently, his curiosity growing with each passing moment. There was so much to learn from this man, so much more than he had ever known. As the fire crackled, the human leaned back, gazing into the flames. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "the wild is a place of balance. Every creature has its place. The wolves, the deer, the birds, everyone has a role. But we all need to help one another in the end. Without the herd, you wouldn't have the strength to survive. Without the wolves, the balance of the land would be thrown off. It's all connected." Dusty, his mind processing the man's words, nodded slowly. The wild was a complex and delicate system. The human's wisdom was beyond anything he could have imagined. As the night wore on, Dusty felt a deep sense of gratitude for the man who had saved him and for the safety of the valley. For the first time in a long time, Dusty felt truly at peace. The morning light stretched across the valley, casting golden hues over the grass. Dusty awoke to the smell of fresh grass and the sound of birds calling in the distance. The human was already awake, tending to the fire and preparing something to eat. Dusty slowly stood, his muscles sore from the previous day's journey, but he felt stronger than he had in a long time. "Good morning." The human greeted him with a smile. "Ready for the journey back?" Dusty hesitated. He had spent so much time alone, separated from his herd, that the thought of going back seemed both exciting and daunting. The human could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "It's okay to be scared," he said kindly. "The world is big, but you've learned a lot in the short time we've spent together. You'll be ready when the time comes." Dusty nodded, feeling a surge of determination. He had learned so much already. The human was right. He wasn't the same fool he had been when he first wandered away from his herd. He was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would find his family. The journey back was not an easy one. As Dusty and the human made their way through the plains, the foal grew more and more anxious. He knew the wolves were still out there, watching, waiting for another opportunity. The human noticed Dusty's unease, and gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," he said. "You've already faced your fear. You're not alone anymore." But as the day wore on, Dusty's anxiety grew. The plains seemed endless, and every rustle in the grass made him jump. The human, sensing the foal's rising fear, stopped and turned to face him. "You've already faced the hardest part," he said. "You survived when the wolves were right on top of you. You can do it again." Dusty looked at the human, the weight of his words sinking in. He had survived once. He could do it again. With renewed determination, Dusty took a deep breath and followed the man onward, pushing past the fear that had once held him back. The wolves might still be out there, but Dusty was no longer the helpless foal he had been before. He had learned to survive, and now he would face the wild with strength and courage. As the days passed, Dusty and the human grew closer, their bond stronger than ever. The journey back was long, but the human's guidance and wisdom helped Dusty stay focused. Finally, one afternoon, Dusty saw it, the distant shapes of his herd grazing on the plains. His heart soared with hope and excitement. He had made it back. The human, too, seemed to sense the foal's joy. He smiled warmly and gave Dusty a pat on the shoulder. "You've done it," he said. "You're ready to rejoin your herd." Dusty couldn't wait to run back to the safety of his family. But as he started to gallop forward, he hesitated, glancing back at the human. "Thank you," Dusty said softly. The man's face softened and he nodded. "Take care, little one. You've learned the ways of the wild. Remember everything I've taught you." With that, Dusty turned and ran toward his herd, the familiar sounds of his family calling out to him. He had made it, and as he joined the safety of the herd, he knew that the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. Dusty ran toward his herd with newfound confidence, his heart racing in excitement. As he approached, the familiar shapes of his family came into view. His mother, a strong and graceful mare, stood near the edge of the herd, watching him with concern. When she saw him, her expression softened and she trotted toward him. Dusty nuzzled against her, the sense of belonging overwhelming him. His mother smiled, brushing her nose against his. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice warm but filled with worry. Dusty paused for a moment, thinking of the man who had saved him and taught him the ways of the wild. "I've learned a lot," he said quietly. "I've learned that the wild is dangerous, but it's also a place of balance. I've learned that sometimes you need help to survive." His mother looked at him with pride. "You're not a foal anymore, Dusty," she said softly. "You're growing stronger every day." Dusty felt a deep sense of peace settle within him. He was back where he belonged. But as he looked out over the plains, a part of him wondered if he would ever see the human again, the one who had shown him the way. Dusty settled back into the rhythm of herd life, but the lessons he had learned from the human stayed with him. He was no longer the frightened foal who had wandered too far from home. He had grown stronger, both in body and spirit. The wild had taught him many lessons, and he had learned them well. His time with the human had given him the strength to face the challenges ahead. Dusty now understood the delicate balance of the land, the connection between all living creatures, and the importance of survival. But as the days passed, he knew there would always be more challenges to face, more lessons to learn. The wild was a place of constant change, and Dusty was ready to embrace it. He would live his life with courage, knowing that he had the strength to face whatever. Days turned into weeks, and Dusty settled back into the herd, growing stronger with each passing day. Yet, despite the comfort of family and the safety of the group, the wild was never far from his mind. He often thought of the wolves, the predators that had almost claimed his life. He wondered if they would return, seeking revenge for the chase they had failed. One evening, as the herd grazed near the edge of the valley, Dusty's ears perked up. The wind had shifted, and with it came the unmistakable scent of wolves. His heart raced. He scanned the horizon, and there, in the distance, a pack of wolves appeared, moving silently through the tall grass. Dusty's body tensed. He didn't want to be caught off guard again. But this time he wasn't alone. His herd was with him, and they would face the wolves together. The stallion, a strong and noble leader, raised his head, alert to the pack's presence. "Form up," he commanded, his voice strong and steady. Dusty, remembering the lessons he had learned from the human, took his place beside the herd, prepared for whatever the wild would throw at them. The wolves circled the herd, their eyes gleaming with hunger. Dusty felt the tension in the air as the pack closed in, their movements swift and silent. The stallion snorted, ready to defend his family. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice low but filled with authority. Dusty's legs shook, but he stood firm, his instincts kicking in. He was no longer the frightened foe who had been hunted by the wolves. He was part of the herd, and he would fight to protect his family. The wolves lunged. The stallion kicked out with powerful hooves, sending one of the wolves tumbling. Dusty followed the lead of the herd, staying close to the others, their movements synchronized. The fight was chaotic, the wolves relentless, but the herd was stronger when united. Dusty felt the power of the group, the strength in numbers, as they worked together to drive the pack back. After what seemed like an eternity, the wolves retreated, disappearing into the tall grass. The herd stood, panting and bruised but victorious. Dusty felt a rush of pride. He had faced his fear, and together with the herd, they had survived. In the aftermath of the battle, the herd gathered together, licking their wounds and ensuring that no one had been seriously harmed. Dusty stood among them, feeling a sense of accomplishment that he had never experienced before. His legs were sore, and his body was bruised, but he was unharmed, and more importantly, he had protected his family. The stallion, who had fought bravely alongside the rest of the herd, turned to Dusty with a proud look in his eyes. "You've grown," he said. "You fought well. I knew you had it in you." Dusty felt his heart swell with pride. He had always looked up to the stallion, and hearing those words meant more to him than anything. "Thank you," Dusty replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "I've learned so much." The stallion nodded, his gaze softening. "The wild is a teacher, Dusty. It doesn't give us easy lessons, but it prepares us for everything we need." Dusty thought of the human, the one who had saved him when he was alone, lost, and terrified. "I couldn't have done it without him," Dusty said quietly, his thoughts drifting back to the mysterious human who had shown him the ways of the wild. "Without him, I would never have learned how to survive." The stallion regarded him with understanding. "Everything has its time and place. And now, it's your time to lead." As the seasons changed, Dusty's confidence continued to grow. The once frightened foe had transformed into a strong, capable member of the herd. He had learned the ways of survival, both from the land and from the wisdom of the human who had once helped him. The herd moved through the plains, following the migrations of the animals, always aware of the dangers that lurked in the wild. The wolves were still out there, but Dusty no longer feared them. He knew that with the herd, there was strength in numbers, and together they could face any challenge. As winter approached, the herd began to prepare for the harsh months ahead. Dusty watched the older horses as they led the group to a sheltered valley, where they would find food and protection from the cold winds. The wild was a harsh teacher, but Dusty was no longer a student. He was a part of the wild, a creature of the land, and he was ready to face whatever the future held. One day, as Dusty grazed near the edge of the valley, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. It was the human. Dusty's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the man who had saved him, the one who had taught him how to survive in the wild. The human approached the herd cautiously, his eyes scanning the land. Dusty trotted toward him, his hooves thundering against the ground. "You returned," Dusty said, his voice filled with awe and excitement. The human smiled, his face weathered but kind. "I knew you would be here," he replied, his voice warm. "The wild has a way of calling us back when we least expect it." Dusty felt a surge of gratitude. The human had given him the strength to face the wild, and now, it seemed that their paths had crossed once more. The human looked at the herd with respect. "You've come a long way, Dusty," he said. "You've become part of the land, part of the wild. I'm proud of you." Dusty's heart swelled. The human's words meant more to him than anything. He had come full circle, no longer a lost foe, but a creature of the wild, ready to face the future with courage. As the man stood among the herd, Dusty watched him closely, his thoughts filled with gratitude. The wild was a place of danger, but it was also a place of beauty and strength. It had shaped him into the horse he was today. He had learned to survive, to fight, and to protect his family. And now, the future of the herd was in his hooves. The man turned to Dusty one last time, his eyes filled with understanding. "The wild will always call to you, Dusty," he said. "But remember this, you are never truly alone. You have the herd and you have the land. You are part of something much bigger than yourself." Dusty nodded, feeling the weight of the human's words. He was no longer just a foe. He was a part of the wild, a part of the cycle of life that moved through the plains. The herd was his family, and together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. With a final glance at the human, Dusty turned to rejoin the herd. The future was uncertain, but he knew that with courage, strength, and the lessons he had learned, they would face it together. Years passed, and Dusty grew into a strong, noble stallion. The wild had become his home, and the lessons he had learned from the human stayed with him, guiding him as he led the herd through the changing seasons. Dusty had found his place in the land, and he had become a part of its cycle, just as the human had taught him. One day, as Dusty stood on a ridge overlooking the plains, he felt the wind on his face and the land beneath his hooves. The wild was a place of balance, a place where every creature had a role. He had learned to embrace it all, the dangers, the beauty, the strength. Dusty's legacy was one of survival, courage, and the unbreakable bond between the land and the creatures that called it home. And as he watched the next generation of foes playing in the distance, he knew that the lessons of the wild would live on. The cycle would continue, and Dusty, the once frightened foe, would forever be a part of it.